This is the biggest fraud Silicon Valley has ever produced. And it didn't start with some shady guy in a basement. It started with a 19-year-old Stanford dropout who convinced some of the most powerful people in America that she had reinvented blood testing. Imagine walking into your local Walgreens, giving a drop of blood and getting a test result that says something is seriously wrong with you. Now imagine that the machine that ran your test had never been proven to work, but the company behind it was worth $9 billion, and nobody had bothered to check. She had Henry Kissinger on her board, she had 4-star generals backing her up, she had a deal with Walgreens, a deal with Safeway, and $700 million from investors who never asked to see the science. And the whole time, the core technology couldn't reliably do what she told everyone it could do. This is how she pulled it off and how it all stayed hidden for as long as it did. It started in 2003. Elizabeth Holmes had just launched a company, and she was already presenting herself like someone who thought she was here to change the world. She wore the black turtleneck, she spoke in this weirdly deep voice. She never stopped talking about her mission. And the whole package was so deliberate that people kept comparing her to Steve Jobs. It wasn't subtle either. The message was basically, here's the next Steve Jobs, so get in line. Her company started as Real-Time Cures and then became Theranos, which honestly just sounds like it costs a lot of money. The mission sounded even better, cheaper, faster blood testing, with tiny samples instead of vials, which meant less pain, quicker results, and a healthcare revolution. That is the kind of sentence investors love, because it sounds humane and profitable at the same time. Then Sunny Balwani came in around 2009 and 2010, becoming the hands-on executive running operations day to day. He was also Holmes's secret romantic partner, which is the sort of detail that never makes a company calmer. Together, they built a culture around secrecy, total control, and the idea that doubting the mission meant you just didn't get it. And Balwani wasn't some background figure. He ran the lab, managed the engineers, and made sure that anybody with doubts kept them to themselves. Holmes sold the vision on the outside, and Balwani kept the lid on everything inside. And the timing helped. Early 2010 Silicon Valley was one of those moments when people were willing to treat confidence like proof. And that board I mentioned, Kissinger, George Shultz, William Perry, Sam Nunn, James Mattis, none of them were scientists or lab people. They were statesmen and generals. Impressive enough to make almost anybody assume the science must be solid. But if you're an investor looking at that lineup, how many people stop and ask the annoying lab question? Very few, apparently. Pitch was simple enough for a billboard. Theranos said its own devices could run a huge menu of accurate blood tests from a tiny finger prick sample. The reality, according to regulators, whistleblowers, reporting, and later prosecutors, was much uglier. The technology could not reliably handle more than a small subset of tests, so the company leaned on conventional lab analyzers and workarounds while still advertising something far more futuristic. That gap between the ad and the actual product was the whole game. Investors were shown a polished version of Theranos where the breakthrough always seemed just one closed-door demo away from becoming obvious. Partners heard about capabilities and readiness that sounded market-ready, while inside the company, the science kept refusing to cooperate. By 2014, Holmes was worth $4.5 billion on paper, which is an incredible return for dressing like your hero and deepening your voice. And then it went from pitch decks to pharmacy shelves. Those Walgreens wellness centers I mentioned, there were about 40 of them, mostly in Arizona, and they were asking regular people to trust this technology with their health. This wasn't a startup in a conference room anymore. This was a startup inside a national pharmacy chain. And Safeway's side of this was even worse. The grocery chain reportedly spent about $350 million building in-store clinics for a Theranos rollout that never fully happened, Imagine renovating all that space for a revolution that basically turned out to be a very expensive maybe. And Theranos kept feeding the illusion. Reports shown to investors used pharmaceutical company logos in ways that suggested outside validation and endorsement that did not actually exist. The company also made claims about deployment and capabilities that overstated reality, making it sound like everybody had already signed off on this thing when nobody really had. And then the damage moved out of conference rooms and onto actual patients. Real patients got results, and some of those results were inaccurate or later voided. Once bad medical information lands in somebody's record, this stops being a glamorous startup fairy tale and becomes something much colder. Inside Theranos, some employees were looking at the same data and getting nervous for exactly that reason. Erica Chung, a lab associate, raised concerns about quality controls and patient safety. Tyler Schultz, a young employee and the grandson of board member George Schultz, also started questioning what the company was doing. That family angle made the whole thing even messier. Tyler wasn't just challenging a boss. He was effectively telling his own grandfather that the company he supported might be misleading people, which is a brutal position to be in when the boardroom and the dinner table start overlapping. Still, the pressure from inside began leaking outward. Those concerns helped Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou piece together what was really going on. And then on October 15, 2015, the Journal published the headline that broke it open. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. After that article, the secrecy stopped looking elite and started looking like a cover-up, and once people saw it that way, the whole thing began collapsing fast. Regulators moved in. CMS inspected the company's Newark, California lab, and in January 2016 issued a letter saying the lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety, which is about as devastating as regulatory language gets. The startup that claimed it had reinvented the lab was now being told, in effect, that it could not safely run one. Walgreens pulled out in June 2016 and shut down the wellness centers. The next month, CMS revoked the Newark Lab's certification and banned homes from owning or operating a lab for 2 years. By October, Theranos closed its clinical labs and wellness centers altogether and tried pivoting into a research device company, which is basically standing in the wreckage going, no, we meant to do this. The legal come-down took longer, but it was relentless. In March 2018, the SEC charged Theranos, Holmes, and Balwani with massive fraud. Holmes settled, paid a $500,000 fine, gave up her shares, and got banned from running a public company for 10 years. Then the criminal side arrived. In June 2018, federal prosecutors filed wire fraud charges against both of them, and by September, the company announced it would dissolve and return remaining cash to creditors. That was it for Theranos. No medical empire, no revolution, just a company shutting down and trying to pay back whoever it could. By the time Holmes finally went to trial in 2021, the whole image was gone. In early 2022, the jury convicted her on 4 fraud-related counts, while acquitting her on the patient-related charges and deadlocking on some others. Balwani was tried separately and he got convicted across the board, all 12 counts, including both investor and patient fraud. So by then, this wasn't a startup unraveling anymore. It was a criminal case landing exactly where it had been heading. Then came the sentencing. Holmes got a little over 11 years. Balwani got nearly 13. After that, the court ordered hundreds of millions in restitution to investors and business partners. Rupert Murdoch, the DeVos family, Walgreens, Safeway, a lot of big names got burned. The investor losses were enormous, and most of that money was never recovered. Arizona consumers did get a $4.65 million settlement, with about 175,000 people eligible for refunds tied to roughly 1.5 million tests. Useful, sure, though not exactly the kind of healthcare disruption the brochures had in mind. And then came the final reversal. The founder, once celebrated as Silicon Valley's youngest self-made female billionaire, had her net worth revised to zero, her company erased, and in May 2023, she reported to a federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. Turns out the revolution was mostly branding in a black turtleneck. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because somehow all of that was real. Enjoyed this story? Leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. Now you know.